Good Tuesday morning. A lot going on around the world, a lot going on here at home. We have 12 people killed in a terrorist attack in Berlin, Germany. And the news now is that 23-year-old Pakistani refugee who arrived a year ago into Germany, they're saying now that he may not be the truck driver. Police know him for petty crimes, and that's it, not for terrorist attacks. So he was picked up right after that horrific event, the terrorist attack. 12 dead, 48 injured. And it was at that open air market, the Christmas market, which has been a tradition in Germany for how long?
700 years.
Oh, my goodness. And the narrow pass in between the booths, so it was so hard for people to get out of the way. It is exactly what happened in Nice over the summer. 86 killed during a Bastille Day celebration. So Germans knew that this was coming. They had warnings last November saying ISIS and Al-Qaeda are urging their followers to use their trucks as vehicle and to plow into crowded places. Soft targets, they say. But because of that now, we have extra patrols, foot patrol officers at the Kris Kringle market outside of the Daily Plaza.
And this is why we have a big cost. It seems little, relatively speaking, but you add it up over all the events and just how people are terrorized. They don't even want to go out to these things.
So because ISIS and Al-Qaeda said, watch out because we'll attack your parades.
Well, when are we going to do something about this? Donald Trump wants to name it Islamofascism. What's he going to do beyond that?
And he did yesterday, while President Obama was going golfing, he did release a statement, say these jihadist terrorists. So he called it like he sees it because we are under attack by ISIS. Keeping an eye on that, of course, if any developments break, we will bring it to you right away. And later at 8:08, Ed Morrissey will be here to talk about the Electoral College vote. And it made history yesterday, but not in the way you thought it would. But now we're going to change subjects a little bit and talk about Dylan Roof and what's next for Dylan Roof.
It's not necessarily that big a change in a subject because it's terrorism.
It is terrorism of a different kind, domestic terrorism. And you had a crazed individual who went into a church and prayed with people and then turned around and killed 9 people, including the pastor and a state senator. So with that, let's welcome back to the program Liza Lucas. She is a reporter for Live 5 News in Charleston, South Carolina. Of course, returning guest. Good morning, Liza. How are you?
Good morning, Amy and Bruce. Nice to be on this morning and be back.
Yeah. So were you, just tell us about the Dylan Roof, the trial, how it ended, how quick it came for jurors to come back with a verdict.
Oh, incredibly quick when you think about how long we've been anticipating this trial. This event, the shooting happened in June 2015. The jurors heard 2 weeks of testimony, and then it only took them 2 hours to come back and convict Dylan Roof on all 33 counts, all 33 federal counts. So a very quick process. They did ask for a little bit of additional testimony. They asked to see some more of the confession video, but even then, a very quick turnaround for this jury.
What was Dylan Roof's reaction when they read the verdict?
Oh, it was very interesting. The whole time I was in the courtroom on and off throughout this process. Cameras weren't allowed. As you may know, federal court doesn't allow cameras. So we were really watching because everyone wanted to know how he was reacting. And he was quite calm during this process. He was often sitting face forward. At times, he would kind of look to his attorney, but very little reaction from Roof throughout the course of the trial and even up to the verdict. We saw very little from him. He's just been kind of composed, almost disinterested in a way. Even when the survivors testified, they themselves noted that he never once even looked at them. He didn't seem to acknowledge the jury. He really sat there face forward during the course of the trial and just didn't have a lot of reaction, which is kind of similar to what we saw during the confession video. He was very calm and composed during that process as well.
Liza, I don't expect you necessarily to comment on this because you're a reporter, but we're on the radio. You can talk about it a little bit. The Kevin Williamson in National Review, I was just alluding to it a little bit earlier with Amy. We were talking about that this is actually a domestic terrorist act. Because conservatives like us don't necessarily believe, we don't like hate crimes. We don't like the designation of a hate crime because a murder is a murder and it doesn't matter, what the motive was. But in this case, what you have is a guy who was actually trying to start a race war. That is a terrorist act. And so you would think that the death penalty would be operable. I mean, you could send the guy to his death because of that. I don't know if you have any comment or perspective on this, but it is an interesting perspective.
That was a huge part of jury selection, whether these jurors would be able to make that decision, and it will be really interesting to see. Here we are, in Charleston, South Carolina. We have a tremendous group that really relies on their faith, and many people said during that jury selection, when it comes down to the death penalty, I don't know if I could or could not do it. Mm-hmm. So that was a big thing that Dylan Roof, when he was representing himself briefly during that process, that was a question that he really posed to jurors. So it's going to be really interesting when we come back on January 3rd for that sentencing phase to see what the jury decides and how long it takes. We're really expecting this part of the trial to take much longer than the testimony phase because these jurors have a lot to consider. And the whole idea of Ruth's mental state will certainly come into play. We're being told that he's not going to be presenting evidence relating to mental health, but at the same time, his attorneys were kind of setting the stage for that throughout the course of the trial, that his mental health is certainly in question throughout this process.
Well, is he going to?
The jurors are going to have to consider.
Yeah, is he going to be representing himself during the penalty phase?
He has requested to do so, and Judge Gergel has time and time again said that's probably not a good idea. He requested to represent himself during the testimony portion of the trial. He did briefly during jury selection, and then he handed it back over to his attorneys. There seemed to be too much going back and forth at the defense table to the judge's liking. So at the end of the day, the attorneys did represent him. But now again, Ruth says he wants to represent himself during the penalty phase of the trial. However, the judge says he has up until January 3rd to change his mind. So we've seen him fluctuate in the past. Not sure how this will pan out, and we're certainly prepared for it to fluctuate in the future.
I'm wondering if it's relevant that I recall family members being very forgiving. Now, you can always forgive, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to waive, the notion of sentencing him to death or believing that he should be put to death. Actually, it's kind of almost a catch-22. Somebody who would represent himself is probably demonstrating.
Well, I heard he wants to represent himself so that the information about his mental health isn't revealed. Well, we already know he's crazy.
Well, here's the thing. If you represent yourself, you're probably that's evidence of the fact that you're crazy. It's a catch-22.
I think you can play it both ways. And
yes.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can play it both ways, and we've had experts throughout the course of this process saying the same thing. I know some national experts have spoken out saying, should Ruth get out? We're not sure exactly what he's going to say. Is this a chance for him to further terrorize these survivors and these families? At the same time, maybe it's him protecting himself and not wanting any of that mental capacity to be revealed further.
So, Liza, I watched those tapes, of him being interviewed by police, and it was just, it was very interesting in that they played those in tape too. What was your reaction when you saw those?
Chilling. I was in the courtroom during that process, and actually that was the first day I was doing coverage. We have an interesting schedule throughout this, coordinating both trials, as we've covered. And I was just chilled to the bone. I mean, we're sitting there for 2 hours, and as a reporter, you're trying to keep perspective, but you can't help be affected at some point. And I think throughout this process, we really saw the press, everyone from here locally to nationally, be affected by this story. I mean, at one point, we had reporters crying during testimony. We had lawyers, even at the defense table, crying, shaking their heads. So this is a very emotional process for everyone except for Dylan Roof. I mean, again, he was just sitting there throughout the course of this, and during that confession video, no reaction. As the confession video was played, no reaction, which was just a strange process to witness.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I seem to recall this is the case, of course, that wound up getting the Confederate flag banished, right? Isn't it? Am I right about that?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, that's what Nikki Haley banished. And then, of course, you couldn't show the Confederate flag. And I'm just wondering, I mean, is that like a done issue? I mean, is anybody, still in South Carolina, have they given up entirely on that? Because it seems like, they basically
knee-jerk
surrendered.
Reaction, yeah.
Well, they surrendered on the Confederate flag, and I mean, I'm sure you went over this, at the time about this controversy.
Well, I think that issue is always kind of skimming the surface. There is a question right now about where that flag is going to ultimately go, where it's going to be displayed at the State House. That's an ongoing issue, and it kind of pops up here and there when they have the relevant meetings, and it's certainly still a hot topic. A lot of people still see that as a historical reference, while others see that as a symbol of hate and racism. So it's still one that kind of sits below the surface and comes up from time to time. I don't know if we'll ever totally find an even ground when it comes to the Confederate flag.
All right. Thanks, Liza Lucas, so much for coming on the show, and we'll have you back soon.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.